sisters and brothers, for the time that's ours to share together this Lord's Day with your prayers and the Holy Spirit's help. I'd like to preach the 5th installment of this series called Identity, from the title, Victorious. Identity, part 5. Victorious. Church family, Israel yet again finds themselves in a tough spot. Having come through the plagues in Egypt, the Red Sea, the problems of bitter water, no food, and then no water again in the wilderness, they find themselves now facing the problem of no security. They are still where we left them the last time. They are at Rephidim, where they wandered in the wilderness without water. Given the rough realities of their terrain, of what would have most likely have been a hot, arid North African desert, had God not shown Moses the rock, and had God not given Moses the instruction to strike the rock with his rod, surely they would have all died. God proved God's self again in relationship, in covenant with them. God did not and would not deliver them from the bondage of Egypt and promised them a land to let them simply die in the wilderness. So God set it up there at Rephidim, where the people complained against Moses, and Moses cried out to the Lord that Moses would receive divine instruction that would result in the people's survival. Moses, along with the elders, would journey a little further. Moses would strike the rock on which God would stand. And water, as we saw last time, would flow from the rock, providing their most basic needs and thereby ensuring their survival. And as they were forming their identity on the other side of slavery in Egypt, they now knew that they were survivors. They knew through these various tests and trials that they were kept. They knew that they were tested, and most of all, they knew that they were free. Now, on the other side of their tailor-made miracle there at the rock, having been provided water in the wilderness there at Rephidim, they are now again facing another trial, this time not internal, but external. This would arguably be the worst one yet. See, they have just refreshed themselves, weary from wandering in the wilderness without water, and just one verse later. Verse 8, they could barely get a few sips in before the Bible says that the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. These poor Israelites were going through it. It wasn't Pharaoh chasing them. It was having no drinkable water. It wasn't having drinkable water. It wasn't having food. It wasn't having food. It was having no water, period. If it wasn't one thing for them, it was another. Have you ever been there before, church family? Have you ever been in a spot where you experienced one much-needed miracle only for it to be followed by some mess? Ever gotten to a place where you finally fixed some internal challenge only to face some greater external conflict that you could not control? Beloved, that is the reality of the text, and that can be the reality of our lives. As much as our journeys have some on-time blessings, our journeys can have some ill-timed battles too. This is how we find the children of Israel camped by the rock at Rephidim. They are freed, but now frightened. They are tested, but now tried. They are kept, but now conflicted. They are defenseless, helpless, weakened by the wilderness, literally facing the battle of their lives that they were not prepared to fight. They were not former soldiers, but they were former slaves. But inasmuch as this was a new territory for them, inasmuch as this was a new struggle for them, just as with the other scenes we have explored on their journey from the wilderness to the promised land, though they were in another rough spot, they were ripe for a miracle from God. These children of Israel were about to discover a new component of their identity as God's free people. The same can be true for you today. While you may be facing new trials, while you may be facing new tests, while you might be experiencing or have experienced some shown up on-time miracles, Reality is, even with your blessed self, you can still face some ill-timed battles. Just like those children of Israel, if you find yourself in that kind of spot, you too are ripe for a victory from God. As we have seen time and time again throughout this series, but as we see it in a new way today, as the struggle moves from an internal challenge to an external conflict, the good news, beloved, is that God works through us impossible victories. So the question becomes then, when faced with overwhelming odds, when everything is stacked against you, when you don't even know how to fight, when to fight, where to fight, or who to fight. Question becomes, church family, from this text, how do you gain the victory? Look at the text, child of God. If you are to gain the victory despite impossible odds, you must first face the fight even when it's not fair. The text says in verse 8, the Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out and fight the Amalekites. Verse 10, so Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. Beloved, remember that these Israelites were former slaves, not former soldiers. Every experience that they would have been to render them docile, demure, and dependent at the hands of their Egyptian taskmasters. Remember that these Israelites were weak and worn, though God had provided for them over and over again. They had literally just satisfied their most basic need for drinkable water. Remember that these Israelites were a bit helpless and defenseless. Every time they faced some challenge, every time they had some discomfort, every time they had some need, they were mumbling and groaning and complaining to and against Moses. They were hardly what you think of when you think of the profile of a fighter. So this fight that we see here in Exodus chapter 17 would not have been fair from the jump. The way the text reads, and what is recounted in other parts of Scripture about this scene, is that this was a sneak attack. The Amalekites knew Israel was a sitting duck. The Amalekites knew that Israel was defenseless. The Amalekites knew that this would have been a win in the bag for them. And even more so, as some scholars suggest, this fight was a fight over water rights. Meaning that the Amalekites would have wanted to fight Israel for ownership of something that didn't even belong to them. Remember that there had been no water in Rephidim. Arguably, if the Israelites had not come, if God had not stood on the rock, and had Moses not struck the rock with his rod, there would still be no water in Rephidim. Brothers and sisters, it was not fair from the jump. The Israelites didn't know how to fight. They didn't have the strength. They didn't have the skills. They didn't have the stamina. But nevertheless, in verse 9, Moses said to Joshua, choose some of our men and go out to fight. And be clear, statistically speaking, the Israelites didn't have a chance. You want to talk about statistics, if you want to talk about their chances of being able to actually overcome the Amalekites, the reality is those statistics would have been very low, if non-existent. The odds were stacked against them. The system was levied over them. Their past, their problems, and other people had defined them up until this point. But then in that same conversation, if you want to talk about statistics and chances, no matter how unlikely it would have been for them to win, they could have won 0 of the battles that they did not get in. The last time I checked, beloved, God plus 1 always constitutes a majority. God in the Exodus, as we have seen it, chose their side. God chose to side with the oppressed. God's choice would be just as true as it was with the Red Sea with water all around, to now at Rephidim with no water except for the rock. You see, church family, half of the battle is in showing up. Half of the battle is getting in it. Half of the battle is believing that you could actually just maybe win. It's simple, but it's true. No, you shouldn't fight everything. No, you shouldn't get into every battle. But the reality is you have zero chances of winning if you make zero choices to fight. You have zero chances of getting into the program if you submit zero applications. You have zero chances of getting that dream job if you make zero connections. You have zero chances of getting ahead if you put zero effort into getting up. Yes, sometimes you'll have to stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, but there will be other times when you will have to fight on to see what the end is going to be. And no, the fight will not always be fair. Yes, others will try to fight dirty. But beloved, remember in the end that those who fight dirty never really win. See, the battle is never just about the moment. The battle is for a greater movement. Help me, Stacey Abrams. Beloved, if we are to gain the victory, we've not only got to face the fight even when it's not fair. We've got to secondly hold up hands on the hill. The text says in verse 9, tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hands. Verse 10, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Verse 11, as long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. Whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other, so that his hands remained steady till the sun set. Church family, see how the victory is won. Joshua fights, and Moses stands. One is not better than the other, but both are necessary for the victory. Children of Israel needed both fighters in the field, and they needed their help on the hill. While some would be fighting in combat, others would be holding up the rod before them. And as we rediscovered last time, it was this rod that they were holding up that wrought miracles for them all along. This rod that Moses had in his hand when God called Moses at the burning bush. It was this rod that Moses used to throw down and become a snake in Pharaoh's court. It was this rod that Moses used to initiate the plagues of thunder, hail, fire, and wind. It was this rod that Moses used to part the Red Sea. It was this rod that Moses used to strike the rock for the water to flow where there is no water. But be clear, beloved, it was not the rod itself that caused all of these things to happen. No, the rod was no magician's stick. The power of the rod was not the rod. Power of the rod was not even the one who held the rod. The power of the rod was the power of God. This power that manifested because of Moses' relationship and obedience to God. The rod represented God's miraculous power that reached into the everyday lives and everyday situations and everyday problems that the people faced. Though the rod did not work the same miracle twice, the rod was a symbol of God's keeping and saving and delivering power. And every time that rod was used, the children of Israel knew that something miraculous was about to happen. So Moses held up this rod before the people, because if they were to gain the impossible victory, it would be because of their attention to the presence of their enemies. It would be because of their focus on the power of God. Beloved, the same is true for you too. If you're going to win the impossible victory, you cannot focus on who's fighting against you. You have to focus on who's fighting for you. If you want to gain the the impossible victory. You have to keep your eyes fixed on the one who works the impossible. Yes, you look at your situation, but you look to and at your salvation as well. Beloved, don't just look at what's in front of you. Look at what's up above you. Don't just look at what you're fighting against. Look at who you're fighting with. The reason why we lose half the battles we do is because our attention is focused everywhere else. Focused on what we don't have, who we don't have, where we are, how we are qualified, how we don't have this, how we don't have that. And that ain't got nothing to do with nothing. With the God that we serve is our all in all. Perhaps the reason why the Israelites were able to focus on the power of God was because they had finally gotten to a place where they were fully and totally and completely only dependent on the Lord. Remember, as we have seen throughout this series, they didn't have any food or access to food, so they had to depend on God to rain down manna every day. They didn't have any water, so they had to depend on God to cause water to flow out of that rock. They didn't even have a GPS or a mapping system, so they had to follow the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. Perhaps that's the reason why we keep on losing so many of our battles, because we're still depending on something else. Still depending on our degree, still depending on our ability, still depending on our job, still depending on our connections, still depending on our network, still depending on our little bit of money we have saved up, still depending on our food, still depending even on our own selves, still depending on everything else but God. When it was God who brought us out, when it was God who freed us, when it was God who kept us, when it was God who provided for us, when it was God when we didn't have anybody, anything, anywhere else. Notice something interesting here, church. The text says that the Amalekites began to win. It wasn't because Joshua and his choice men got tired, which you would logically think. It was because Moses, who was holding his hands up, stretched out in a position of power, that when he got tired and they grew heavy, the Israelites began to falter in battle. This is, be clear, no fault of Moses. It's a natural reaction. Try to hold your arms out in front of you for more than 2 minutes. And then put a rod in between those hands. I guarantee your hands will grow heavy, as the text says. That's why it was so critical for Moses to bring with him Aaron and Hur. But while it was Moses' responsibility, it was too much for Moses to bear by himself. If all of the people were going to gain the impossible victory, eventually make it through the wilderness to the promised land, yes, it would be because of the faithfulness of the fighters in the field, but it would also be because of the helpers on the hill. Beloved, leading the people and lifting up the rod, lifting up the power of God before them is no easy task. Ask me how I know. That's why we have to do more than just pray for our leaders. We have to come alongside them and support them in that work. Like Aaron and Hur in the text, we have to set up a stone for our leaders to sit on. Or somebody gets one side, somebody else gets the other side. Hold the leader up as the leader lifts up before the people, not himself or herself, but the very power of God working on behalf of the people. And no, church family, Aaron and her's work is not glorious work. No, that work doesn't get the spotlight. No, it's not the most interesting work. It's hard work. It's smelly work. It's messy work. It's smelly work. It's intensely personal work. It's stressful work. Yes, sometimes it's even grunt work. A church family, it's good work. And it's necessary work. Because the work is not really about the ego of the leader. Because it wouldn't have been Moses alone who would have lost if he had not been supported. The whole Israelite nation would have been lost. The Bible says that because they faced the fight even when it wasn't fair. Because they held up Moses' hands on the hill, that his hands remained steady till the sun set. Just one verse later, verse 13 says, so Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. And that's enough to shout on and go home right there. Within the meantime, between two short verses, the Israelites won the impossible victory. They were attacked at their weakest point. They had never fought a battle before, but they won anyhow. Church family, if we are to gain the impossible victory, we must thirdly and finally build a banner for believers. Text says in verse 15, Moses built an altar and called it, the Lord is my banner. He said, if our hands were lifted up to the throne of the Lord will be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. And notice here that Moses did not give out medals that day. Notice that Moses did not give Joshua a trophy for his triumph. Notice that Moses did not even give out appreciation certificates to Aaron and Hur. Notice what he did do. That was, he built an altar there where they won the impossible victory. And he called that place Jehovah Nissi. The Lord is my banner. Not Joshua and the choice men are my banner. Not Aaron and Hur is my banner. Not even Moses and his stellar leadership is my banner. But Jehovah Nissi, the Lord, is my banner. But while they all played a role in gaining the impossible victory, as we have seen time and time again throughout their wilderness experiences, they came through this because the Lord did it. It was because they lifted up their hands to the throne of God. It was because of the presence and the power and the person of God, Jehovah Nissi, by which they overcame. Church family, it is by and in the name of the Lord that we must always lift up our own banners. For Psalm 20 verse 5 says, we will shout for joy when you are victorious. Lift up our banners in the name of our God. Sisters and brothers, it is God alone who has been our help in ages past. And it's God alone who is a very present help in the time of trouble. And it's God alone who will be our hope for years to come. It is by God alone by which generations before us, generations with us, and generations to come on which we must rely. And it is right, church family, that the one who does all the work should get all the praise. As I get ready to take my seat, many of us will gather around a Thanksgiving table later this week. And before the food is blessed, we'll have to go around and say one verse of scripture and say one thing that we're grateful for. And church family, on this Thanksgiving Sunday, I think today's a good day to give the one who does all the work, to give him all the praise. But just like these Israelites, the Lord has worked some miracles in our lives. Just like these Israelites, the Lord has given us water in our wilderness. Just like these Israelites, the Lord has given us manna every morning. Just like these Israelites, the Lord has given us impossible victories. And for that, we ought to build our banners. And we ought to say thank you for what the Lord has done. And all you have to do is start thinking back over your life. And I guarantee that that I in thinking will turn into an A. And that the more you think, the more you'll thank. For he's been water when I'm thirsty. Somebody say thank you. He's been food when I'm hungry. Somebody say thank you. He's been a shelter in the time of storm. Somebody say thank you. He's been a friend when I've been all alone. Somebody say thank you. He's been my savior when I couldn't save myself. Somebody say thank you. And he gave me the victory when I couldn't even help myself. Somebody ought to say thank you. The songwriter said it this way: tragedies